Hi everyone, for this presentation we're going to go over the cranial nerves. There are actually 12 pairs of cranial nerves which will serve essential roles in sensory, motor, and autonomic functions of the head, the neck, and even some visceral organs. Let's go over these cranial nerves in the next few slides. Here we have an overview of the cranial nerves. Like I said, there are 12 pairs of cranial nerves. If you notice, they're numbered using Roman numerals 1 through 12. Here's a list of all the cranial nerves in this order. So the first one is the olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve number 2 is optic. Cranial nerve number 3 is the oculomotor. Cranial nerve number 4 is the trochlear. Cranial nerve number 5 is the trigeminal nerve. Cranial nerve number 6 is the abducens. Cranial nerve number 7 is the facial. Cranial nerve number 8 is the vestibulocochlear. Number 9 is the glossopharyngeal. 10 is the vagus. 11 is the accessory. And 12 is the hypoglossal. For the names of the nerves, you can use this mnemonic over here. Once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. If you don't like this one, you may look online. There are several other options that you can use. With regards to function, the cranial nerves will either have a sensory function or they will have a motor function, or if they have both, then we call it either both or mixed. Here I'm calling it both because there is a mnemonic all the way over here to the right that you can use to understand or remember the function. And if I used mixed, then you would not know if I'm talking about the motor function or the mixed function. So that's why I use both. And the mnemonic for the functions is, some say money matters, but my brother says big brains matter most. And they're all arranged in a row. Therefore, if you look at them following the same row, they will all be related to the same cranial nerve. First, we'll have your olfactory nerve, which is the first cranial nerve. This nerve, it actually enables your olfactory system and therefore activates your sense of smell. Cranial nerve number 1 is going to be the shortest sensory nerve, and it starts in your brain and it will end in the upper inside part of your nose, as we can see right over here. See all these nerves inside of the nasal cavity? Well, that's where they will end. Now, the olfactory nerve is one of two nerves, together with cranial nerve number 2, which is the optic nerve, that will originate directly from your cerebrum. The other cranial nerves, they start in the lower parts of your brain, which is the brainstem. Now, the brainstem includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The other fact about the olfactory nerve is that it is not part of the peripheral nervous system like most cranial nerves. So again, the olfactory and the optic nerve, they're actually part of the central nervous system. And this is because they actually originate embryonically from the forebrain, and therefore they're considered components of the central nervous system. In addition, the olfactory nerve and the optic nerve, they're not myelinated by Schwann cells, which are the ones that are located in the peripheral nervous system. And there is a specific glia that will myelinate this olfactory nerve. Here on the model to the left, we can see your olfactory nerve right over here. Moving on, we have cranial nerve number 2, which is the optic nerve. And this will be one of 6 cranial nerves that will innervate either the motor, the sensory, or the autonomic structures in the eyes. The other cranial nerves are the oculomotor nerve, which is cranial nerve number 3, trochlear nerve, which is cranial nerve number 4, trigeminal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 5, the abducens nerve, which is cranial nerve number 6, and finally the facial nerve, which is cranial nerve number 7. So from cranial nerves 2 all the way to cranial nerve number 7, they will all work to stimulate the eye either by a sensory input, a motor input, and even through the autonomic input. With regards to function, the optic nerve is purely sensory, where it will sense the incoming light and image that's displayed on the retina, which is going to be located in the back part of the eye, right over here. Now the optic nerve will then transmit this image into the cerebral cortex. In addition to this, the optic nerve will also work together with the oculomotor nerve to change the pupil size. So the optic nerve will conduct these afferent impulses to the brain, and then the oculomotor nerve will constrict the pupils if the light is bright, and it will allow the pupil to dilate when the light is dim. And if you notice over here on this image, it starts as the optic nerve, and then right at this location, which is called the optic chiasm, the optic nerve actually switches to the opposite side, and then it becomes the optic tract, and this information will go all the way to the back of the brain where we have the occipital lobe, and that's where your visual cortex is going to be located. Therefore, most of what is captured in our left eye will actually be processed in the right side of the visual cortex, and the opposite is also true. So most of the information that's captured in the right eye will travel through the optic nerve, cross over on the optic chiasm, and continue through the optic tract all the way to the back of the left visual cortex. And remember that together with the olfactory nerve, the optic nerve is also part of the central nervous system. Now, all the others moving forward will be part of the peripheral nervous system. On the image to the left, this nerve right over here would be your optic nerve that is traveling to the front to innervate the eye. Here we have cranial nerve number 3, which is the oculomotor nerve, and it's going to be responsible for innervating the majority of the muscles that are located on the outside of the eye, what we call the extraocular muscles. Which muscles are these? The superior rectus, the medial rectus, the inferior rectus, the inferior oblique, and there are also other muscles that we don't really cover, but these will be the levator palpebrae superioris, the ciliary muscle, and the sphincter muscle. And as you can imagine, when the superior rectus contracts, it will pull the eye back superiorly. Same thing with the medial rectus. It functions to bring the eye closer to the midline, so it will adduct the eye. Then we have the inferior rectus, which will rotate the eye inferiorly when it contracts. And the inferior oblique muscle, it has this unique role because it causes the eye to not only move downward, but also laterally when it contracts. With regards to the sphincter muscle, this is going to be part of the autonomic nervous system, and specifically the parasympathetic nervous system. Therefore, the action of the sphincter muscle, which is located on the iris, is actually to constrict the pupils and diminish the amount of light that's going through. And lastly, I also talked about the ciliary muscle, and this is the one that will allow for the eye to accommodate again and go back to normal. On this model to the left, this one would be your oculomotor nerve. Next, we have what we call the trochlear nerve, which is cranial nerve number 4, and it will also contribute to the motor function of the eye, but it only innervates one muscle that is going to be attached to the eye. And this muscle is what we call the superior oblique, as we can see right over here from this image. Now, the action of the superior oblique in response to the innervation of the trochlear nerve is going to be unique and different from the innervation of the oculomotor nerve, in that when the superior oblique muscle contracts alone, it causes the eye to torque inward and inferiorly. On the model to the left, we can see the trochlear nerve right over here, below the oculomotor nerve. Moving on, we have the trigeminal nerve. which has, like the name says, 3 main branches. The branches are the ophthalmic branch, the maxillary branch, and the mandibular branch. And like the name says, the ophthalmic branch will innervate the eye, whereas the maxillary branch will innervate the maxilla, and the mandibular branch will innervate the mandible. So it's pretty simple for you to pay attention to the names and you will know exactly where it will innervate. And from this image, you can see that the ophthalmic branch is colored here in blue, the maxillary branch is covered in yellow, and the mandibular branch is covered in purple. So this is the region of the head that will be innervated by each branch of the trigeminal nerve. If we want to go a little bit deeper, we can say that the ophthalmic branch will get sensations from the forehead, the eyelids, and the nose, as seen on this image here in blue. The maxillary will receive sensations from the lower eyelid, upper lip, and cheek, and the mandibular branch will control the mastication or the chewing. On the model to the left, we can see the trigeminal nerve with the 3 branches. The one closer medially would be your ophthalmic branch, the one in the middle is the maxillary branch, and the one that's more lateral would be your mandibular branch. The abducens nerve is going to innervate one muscle in the eye, and this will be the lateral rectus. And it makes sense because the name is already telling you what it will do. It will abduct the eye. So if it's abducting the eye, it's trying to pull the eye away from the body. Therefore, it's going to bring the eye to look laterally. The abducens comes back medially on the pons. So here is your abducens nerve. The facial nerve, as we can see, it has several different branches. And because it has several different branches, it will cause or have several different effects. And here I'm going to give you an example of a few of them, but not all. Therefore, we can say that it will provide innervation for the muscles to cause facial expression. Notice how the branches of the facial nerve are all over the muscles of the face. So when these muscles contract, it will give you your facial expression. In addition, it can cause salivation. And because it innervates 2/3 of the interior portion of the tongue, it also helps with tasting. And lastly, I'm going to say that the facial nerve is going to be responsible for closing your eye and also for blinking. And this is because it innervates the muscle that runs around the eye, which is called the orbicularis oculi muscle. On this model to the left, we can see that this was the abducens, so right next to it is the facial nerve. Next, we have the vestibulocochlear nerve, and if we break down the word vestibule and cochlea, we're going to see that there are 2 parts to this nerve. One that will be innervating the vestibule and one that will be innervating the cochlea. The primary function of the vestibular nerve is to maintain the body balance and the eye movement, while the cochlear is going to be responsible for hearing. Notice how on this image you have nerves that are coming from the cochlea and nerves that are coming from the vestibule coming together, and from here they will exit through this hole, which is the internal acoustic meatus or canal, and head on to the auditory cortex within the brain. On the model to the left, we can see that right next to the facial nerve would be your vestibulocochlear nerve. Here we have the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 9. It is one of 4 cranial nerves with sensory, motor, and parasympathetic functions. And it will originate from the medulla oblongata, and it terminates in the pharynx. Notice here how it will innervate part of the tongue and part of the pharynx, and this is why it's called the glossopharyngeal nerve, because glosso means tongue and pharyngeal means pharynx. And because it is a mixed nerve, meaning that it has sensory and motor functions, The sensory part will go to the tongue, the pharynx, and the palate, and the motor will go to the pharyngeal muscles, and also, if we notice over here, to the parotid salivary gland. On the image to the left, we can see below the vestibulocochlear, we will find the glossopharyngeal nerve. Here we have the vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10, and this is a very important nerve. It makes up about 75% of the peripheral nervous system, and it provides the parasympathetic input to most of the thoracic and also the abdominal organs. And because it goes all the way down to the digestive system, it's going to be considered the longest cranial nerve. And look at all the organs that it will have an effect. So it has an effect on the heart, on the larynx, on the lungs, on the liver, stomach, pancreas, spleen, kidneys, and like I said, the digestive system. Here are a few examples of the function of the vagus nerve. In the heart, it will promote cardiac relaxation. With regards to the digestive system, it will promote salivation, for example, and other secretory activities. The vagus nerve also has a significant effect on the respiratory cycle, where it helps in contracting and also stiffens the airways to prevent collapse of these structures. On the model to the left, below the glossopharyngeal, we're going to find the vagus nerve. Here we have cranial nerve number 11, which is the accessory nerve, and the primary function is motor. There are two branches of the accessory nerve, an internal branch and an external branch. The internal branch will innervate the muscles of the palate, the pharynx, and the larynx and cause them to contract. And the external branch will innervate the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius, which are muscles located in the neck, as we see right over here. Again, on the model to the left, we have the accessory nerve below the vagus nerve. Lastly, we have the hypoglossal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 12, and it will mainly innervate the muscle of the tongue, as glossal, like I said previously, means tongue. So hypo means below, and as we can see from this image, it's innervating the area below the tongue. And now on the model to the left, the last one over here laterally was the accessory nerve. So where is the hypoglossal? Well, the hypoglossal, you need to come further up, and it's going to be more medially. So these two are your hypoglossal nerve. Here we have two lab models, and we can see these cranial nerves on these models. I think it's easier to go on the image on the right first. So this would be your olfactory nerve. Right over here we have the optic nerve. Inside the optic nerve, which would be inside of the brain, is the optic chiasm. Then we have this line over here, which is the oculomotor nerve. Don't get confused with this structure over here, which is the memory body. Then the trochlear nerve is parallel to the oculomotor nerve. Remember, they're both going to innervate muscles of the eye. Right over here, this is part of the trigeminal nerve that will then branch out into 3 different branches. And then we go medial. This within the pons is the abducens nerve. Then we have the facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear. The glossopharyngeal we can't see. Then we go to the vagus nerve, the accessory nerve, and the hypoglossal nerve. On this other model, we have the olfactory. Notice how it's very similar, the two. Then we have the optic coming through the optic canal. Then right over here is a little bit hard to see. We have the oculomotor nerve. This would be your trochlear nerve. And this ball over here, which we can see on both sides, it's the trigeminal nerve. Notice how this image over here has 3 branches. The top one is the ophthalmic branch, the one in the middle is the maxillary branch, and the one below is the mandibular branch. Then we come medial for the abducens nerve. Then we come over here to the facial nerve and the vestibulocochlear nerve right next to it. Then this one would be your glossopharyngeal, your vagus, your accessory, and then you come up for your hypoglossal nerve. This is a table for the description of all the cranial nerves with regards to the number, the name, the type, if it's sensory, motor, or mixed, or in our case, if it's both of them, and some of the functions.